What's going on? Welcome to Tech with Sean, and today we're taking a look at the 4K OLED version of the 2020 Razer Blade 15 base model. Okay, this version of the laptop that I have is the Mercury White chassis, and with these specs, the MSRP is typically $22.99, but it goes on sale for less than that if you look around. The CPU inside is the i7-10750H, and this is 6 cores, 12 threads, and at its stock speeds, the single core boost will go up to 5 GHz. It has 16 GB of dual-channel DDR4, and the DIMMs are rated for 3200 MHz, but because the Razer BIOS doesn't have any XMP or memory settings, you're going to be stuck running it at 2933 MHz in Windows. This came with a 512 GB NVMe drive, and on the base model you do have another empty slot, so I've thrown an extra 1 TB NVMe in there. On the advanced model though, you have a larger battery, and because of that there's no additional room in there for a second slot, so having 2 slots is one area where the base model kind of has a leg up on the advanced model if you ask me. And for the GPU, this has the 8 GB RTX 2070 Max-Q, and this is the 90-watt version. It's going to be able to play some less demanding games at the native 4K resolution, but anything else, it'll pretty much handle anything at 1080p, so it's a pretty decent choice for a laptop. Now, one big difference between this and a lot of other gaming laptops is going to be the refresh rate. And you see a lot of them with 144 Hz, 240 Hz, even 300 Hz nowadays. And this one, even though it's 4K, it's only going to do 60 frames per second. So how is that different than these other laptops, and what does that mean, and who is this laptop for? I would say this is a really choice laptop for people that like single-player games and stuff that's not really competitive and online. If you prefer enjoying games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, stuff like that, where the frame rate, you're not trying to get up there like Counter-Strike Go and play online. You're really sacrificing the refresh rate for the eye candiness. So depending on the type of games you play, it could be a good fit, or you might want to get something with a fast refresh rate. It really is up to you. If you like playing older games and emulation and stuff, this will run all your old stuff at 4K with that RTX 2070. Lighter weight games and anything older than probably 5 years, this is definitely going to be able to, run at max settings, super high resolution, and it's going to look really great. It's also great for media consumption. If you like, just watching YouTube videos, watching movies on your laptop, watching them on this OLED panel is really as good of an experience as you're going to get from like a really nice expensive TV. Or maybe you're just somebody who likes a crisp, colorful panel. I'm kind of spoiled because I use my MacBook to edit on, and that has a really nice screen. So honestly, a lot of laptop screens, they're 250 nits, 50% sRGB. I find them really disappointing, but if you just love a really saturated, really contrasty, bright picture, then an OLED laptop may just be the thing for you. Now, these are not budget laptops, and they do command a premium price, and the build quality is a big part of why that is the case. Starting off with, we have the chassis, and this is it's a unibody chassis milled out of a solid piece of metal, and you can really tell the difference in rigidity and just how it feels compared to most other laptops out there. The body itself on this silver version, or Mercury White as they call it, is very similar to a silver MacBook Pro. It has this similar metal finish. It's kind of brushed, it's not glossy or anything. This is very fingerprint resistant, which I know that's not really typical for all Razer laptops. I've never owned one of the black ones, but I've seen them, and in all the reviews people talk about how they're a fingerprint magnet, but I would say this Mercury White chassis is pretty much the opposite of that. This has some top firing speakers on either side of the keyboard, and they're actually pretty decent compared to most gaming laptops. It comes with some pre-installed Dolby Atmos software, and by default there's this pre-applied profile on there, and I would recommend unclicking that and making either a custom profile or using like the dynamic or music settings, because it makes a noticeable difference in the loudness of the laptop, and once you get it set up, it actually sounds pretty good. It's not on the same level as a MacBook Pro, but it's definitely louder than most other gaming laptops that I've tried out. The keyboard is pretty decent. It's really flat. All of the keys are totally flat. There's no dish to them at all. So it's almost more like a regular Mac keyboard than a MacBook keyboard. Those are totally flat and they're kind of spaced out. And that's what I work on, so I'm pretty used to the feel of it. The keyboard does have RGB backlighting, but it's only one zone. So you have to pick, the color you want it to be or set it to a color cycle or something like that. The quality of the backlighting is good though, and I can easily make out all of the letters and everything if I'm in a dark room, so not really any complaints there. For the trackpad, this has a pretty nice, I would say, glass trackpad with Windows Precision drivers. If I had any complaints about it, I would say that maybe it's a little hard to push in to click something than other trackpads, but you can also just tap on the flat surface, so I end up doing that most of the time. This does have pretty decent serviceability, I would say. You just take out a few screws and then you have full access to the inside of the laptop. It has two M2 slots and also two RAM slots, so if you want to upgrade the storage or the memory, both of those are an option. There's also an Intel Wi-Fi card, and that is screwed in, not soldered in, so that's a good thing. And finally, the fan noise. This actually is pretty decent on the fan noise. I believe they kind of limit the wattage and the clock speeds a little bit to keep that down since this is such a thin system, but I really don't have any complaints about the fan noise. It has a little bit of a different sound. I would say it's more of like a mechanical sound versus some other ones that are, I don't even know how to explain it. I would say you hear more torque, maybe more of like a than a whoosh. That's not very scientific. But they don't really get that loud. I mean, under load you're gonna hear them, but they're not gonna like fill up your room. Like I've heard some laptops that are just like having, the leaf blower going, and this isn't that bad, so I would say they're okay. Alright, now let's talk in more detail about that OLED screen. This is kind of like the crown jewel of the laptop, I would say, and if you're going to look at this model, this is the reason you're looking at it over the 144Hz version. It has 100% sRGB coverage and even 100% of the DCI-P3 color gamut, so if you're watching HDR stuff, it's going to look really good. This supports HDR in Windows, and it goes way up over 500 nits, so it's one of the brightest laptops I've ever seen. The OLED panel just absolutely delivers superior color, vibrancy, contrast, pixel density, just in everything but the refresh rate. It's just totally superior to everything else out there. Unless you've seen the OLED in person, there's not really any way to convey it. If you're not watching it on an OLED panel, you're not really going to see the contrast that's there. It's just so black. The pixels, they can turn totally off. So when you have something black on the screen, it is totally seamless. Like the bezels just blend into it. It's like floating there, and the contrast is so much higher than even an IPS panel. The viewing angles are also great. It is a glossy finish, so depending on the environment in the room, you may have some problems with that if you're looking at it from like a side angle. But as far as, being able to see it, it's still super bright and super vivid, and the colors don't shift a lot when you move side to side. One thing to consider is that even though it's not 144 Hz, you're only running at 60 Hz, the response time on OLED is basically instant. Since the pixels themselves are the light source, as soon as they switch, the image itself is switched. So there's no 3 millisecond, 5 millisecond, no ghosting or nothing like that. It's just like really fast response times. So I found that in a lot of games, even though I was losing the frames per second, having that faster response time still kept it feeling much snappier than I would expect from a 60 Hz panel. It is 4K, and in games, not everything is going to run at 4K on a 2070 Max-Q, but luckily running stuff at 1080p and upscaling it looks nice and crisp, especially on just a 15.6-inch monitor. There is also some room there, so you can turn up like a positive resolution scale in some games. So you're, kind of doing a upsampling or something, and it looks pretty decent whenever I've run 1080p on there. One gripe I do have is that there's no 1440p resolution for some reason. You can run at 1080p or jump up to 4K, but there's no in between, 1800 or 1440 options. I did try setting a custom resolution with the CRU custom resolution utility, and I was able to set a 1440p resolution, but it behaved really weird. Just after adding a 1440p resolution option, Windows saw it as the default resolution, and then it started giving me problems. Certain games I could run in borderless and it would work, but not full screen. Other games I could work in full screen, but not borderless. Some games it would like just default and show a black screen. Some games wouldn't run at all. The only game that worked without problems at 1440p was Skyrim Special Edition, but it caused so many problems with the other games that I ended up just deleting it out of there. If you do run into any weird scaling problems, for instance like Red Dead Redemption 2, if I try to run it at 1080p, it runs in a small window in the center of the screen. So what I had to do for that is either change the desktop resolution to 1080p before launching the game, or inside the game, set it up to run at 4K, but then turn the resolution scale down to 50%. Either one of those fixed the problem, but just certain games did not want to run at a non-native resolution. So that's something to keep in mind if you do have any problems with your games displaying properly. Now this is a thin and light laptop, and I believe that Razer has been somewhat conservative with how they handle the TDP and the throttling so that they can keep the temperatures under control in this thin metal chassis. One consideration to keep in mind is that this is only a 60Hz panel, so we're not trying to push 200 frames per second in games. We only need to keep it at 60. So what I've done is I used the Quick CPU app, and I've limited the wattage. So the first boost clock I set for 45 watts, and then the longer boost clock I set for 35 watts, and then in most games I run it with the peak boost clock set at 3.8 gigahertz. If something needs more CPU, I might turn it up 4.1, 4.2 gigahertz, or if it's an older game I might turn it down. I might run it at 3 or 3.2 gigahertz, and really that's going to let me limit the noise and the heat generated. I'd really just want it to push 60 frames per second. I don't need it to do a lot on top of that, and I want to run games as quiet and as cool as I can. So I really like having that flexibility. And when we jump into the benchmarks, just take a look up at the Afterburner overlay, and you'll be able to see what clock speeds I'm running them at. For the GPU, I haven't set a memory overclock on this. I think there is some headroom there if you want to do it, but I've just let Afterburner run the OC scanner and it'll apply that curve to it. You could also, if you don't want to do that, just hit plus 100 on the core or something and just do a basic overclock, but I found those to help it get up over the traditional max Q boost limits. By default, this was only boosting up into the 1400 or so megahertz in most games, but after using the OC scanner curve, it boosts up more into the 1600 range, so that's a lot better for the max Q GPU. Well, that's how I set it up. Now let's jump into some gameplay and see how it actually performs. I've done some of these as screen recordings with NVIDIA Shadowplay, but other ones I've recorded off screen so you can get an idea of how good that OLED panel really looks. Okay, time for my final thoughts on the Razer Blade OLED 2020 15-inch base model. That's a mouthful. Now, you're definitely paying a premium for this. You're not getting the best value in gaming laptops. Something like that, that's going to be, if you're looking for bang for the buck, you want like the Acer Nitros or something like that. In this, you're definitely paying a premium for the finish, the build quality, the speaker and screen quality, and maybe a little bit the name brand also. You're also getting some aesthetics with this laptop that are not really an option with many other models. This is more minimal. It's just plain metal construction, just plain white keys. There's no real big RGB on the outside, no huge metal accents, no, crazy custom stuff on it. It looks like a block of metal. And there's really, if you went into the store and were like, hey, I want a gaming laptop that looks a lot like a MacBook, because that's the style I want, there's really not a lot of other options out there. I've never had a Razer laptop before, but from what I hear online, they don't necessarily have the best customer service if you do have an issue. So something that I've heard from people that I thought would be worth mentioning is that you may want to look into getting a warranty from the store where you buy it, like a product replacement plan, versus relying on the Razer support, just because I've heard if you do have to RMA something, it can really be a pain in the butt depending on the agent you get hooked up with and everything like that. One other consideration you may have buying one of these in 2020 is the Ampere versus Turing thing. Now they've announced those 3000 series GPUs, and I'm gonna put one in my computer definitely, but something you may want to keep in mind is that the wattage, the power draw on those is markedly increased over the Turing cards. Now we saw the Pascal, the NVIDIA 10th generation, and those were very efficient. When those came to laptops, they delivered like a performance leap like we've basically never seen with laptop GPUs. Then with the Turing cards, the power draw was increased, and we saw the performance gains kind of lessened because of that. And now with Ampere, the power draws increased even more so than it was from Pascal to Turing. So I would assume that the gains in non-RTX apps are going to be, even lower than they were from Pascal to Turing. So that's something to keep in mind. I think that for a lot of games, something like this with a 2070 is going to be pretty viable for a long time, even though the new cards are coming out this year. But all in all, it's a pretty solid premium laptop, and that screen just really delivers on color and vibrancy and everything like that. So now I just really want somebody to put out a desktop OLED monitor, If your company has that 27-inch high refresh OLED, you got my money. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and I'll see you next time.